Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, and welcome to the Peptide Forum. I just wanted to give everybody just a few minutes to go ahead and get settled. Exactly 2 minutes. So right now would be the perfect time to go ahead and grab a glass of water, use the restroom, and then get yourself situated. Please come prepared with your questions. Start thinking about them already right now. We'll go ahead and go through our brief presentation, and then we'll open everything up for discussion. So looking forward to seeing everybody tonight and getting into a lot more great questions. I mean, last week I think was fantastic. We answered no less than 25 questions, um, and then gotten deep into some topics, which also spurred on some more conversation for tonight's topic. Um, so
Which is peptide stacks.
yes, sorry. I kind of left everybody hanging. Thank you for catching me on that one.
Anybody on yet?
We already got people flowing in.
I can't see anybody on my end.
Let me go ahead and pull up. Can you see that right there?
I don't see anything.
We got about 10 people right now. And another one just popped in. And it is 5:02. Hold on, we got a question that just popped in. Chat isn't open. All right, let me go ahead and take care of that for you guys.
I don't see the chat. I don't see any questions on my end.
Click on where it says the Q&A, and it'll pop up for you.
Ah, there we go. There we go.
And I'm going to make sure that I open up chat to everybody. I wasn't trying to be selfish.
Brooke says chat isn't open, by the way.
Yep. I'm opening that up to everyone. All right. Chat should be live.
Great. All right, before we begin, I want to do the disclaimer here. So I want to make it clear that this discussion is for educational and research purposes only. Nothing here is medical advice, and nothing discussed is intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. All peptides mentioned are investigational and discussed purely in a research context. Any mention of dosing concepts, timing, or stacking reflects theoretical research frameworks only and should not be applied in practice. The presenters assume no responsibility for how this information is interpreted or used. By attending this webinar, you acknowledge that you're responsible for your own health decisions and that any health-related actions should be taken only under guidance of a licensed healthcare professional. All right, that takes care of our indemnification.
That takes care of the housekeeping, as I like to say.
Thank you, FDA.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
You're gonna
So
get
let's get
started
into
here.
the stacks.
All right. So we asked you guys last week what you guys wanted to hear about this week as the main concepts or main things discussed. And by and large, everybody mentioned that they would like to know more about stacking peptides and the particulars of that timing, dosing, what can and can't or should or shouldn't be stacked directly with each other. So I put together some notes today. I've got about 9 pages of notes. I don't know if we'll get all the way through all of it, but what I did is I just kind of bit off some of the basic stacks that are the most popular with the, I would say, maybe 10 or 12 most popular, most used peptides currently in the space. And we'll kind of go through those, what they are, how they work together, how often they should be taken, basic dosing, and some basic do's and don'ts with those. So Let's see. Okay, the chat is live. So
I'll monitor the chat.
just housekeeping here. Should I close the Q&A and we're only going through the chat?
I like to leave the Q&A up because that will stack our questions. If we leave the chat open, it's just a running log. So if
Gotcha.
there gets more dialogue going in the chat, we'll very good chance that we'll miss questions. So the Q&A, the best place to leave questions. It just stacks them for us, and it helps us answer all the questions.
Great. Brooke is saying that her chat is still disabled.
Brooke,
Can we check that?
I have opened it for everybody. You should be able to have access to the chat.
All right, well, let's just get into this. So the first stack that I picked off here is of particular interest to me these days, as it deals a lot with cognitive, degenerative and cognitive problems and neuroplasticity. So the first cognitive and neuroplasticity research stack we'll talk about neurotrophic signaling, stress modulation, and synaptic pathway investigation. So commonly grouped peptides in this stack would be CMAX, SILANC, DSIP, which stands for delta sleep inducing peptide. And so CMAX is basically geared around. Who keeps texting me? That's too loud. I keep turning my text off and it keeps coming in. I apologize for that. Josh, stop texting me. I think he's in this thing and he's texting me. Okay, so first one is CMAX. So CMAX is based around building BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and also NGF, which is nerve growth factor. And this is highly studied right now for Alzheimer's and dementia, which is currently being called type 3 diabetes. These are not working on, let's say, the underlying root of those, but they're working on the neural factors that deal with type 3 diabetes and Alzheimer's and dementia. So, and delta sleep inducing peptide is also in this category. Semax is often taken in the morning time as it's quite energizing for many people. It can bring great focus, but also it can be kind of almost energizing and almost like a stimulant in the mind. It's often stacked at the same time with Solanc, which has similar qualities to it, but ends up being a little bit more on the mellowing tip, where it's hugely anxiolytic, meaning it has really large anti-anxiety effects. I particularly like to take the Semax in the morning and the Solanc in the evening time, but a lot of people stack these together at the same time, often even in the same vial or in the same nasal spray. They can be combined. They do not cross signaling pathways or compete on any signaling pathways, and they work really great together. The reason that they're grouped is they're focusing on the central nervous system signaling focus, and these are often studied more intranasally than as an injectable form. I think there's a question. Nope.
Not yet.
All right. Is the chat open? Is it?
The chat is open.
Okay.
Let's see.
I'm gonna put the QA on.
Nobody there, and no questions on the Q&A yet as of yet.
All right. So the delta sleep inducing peptide is sometimes taken during the day because it also has hugely anxiolytic effects as well. But I like to take this 20 to 30 minutes before bedtime, as it really works with the um, the pathways at night when you're going to sleep, and your growth hormone as well. So it doesn't work on the growth hormone pathways, but it kind of works in conjunction with that and works with the natural pulsatility at night. Um, I know a couple people who like to take this during the day, but most people choose to take this in the evening, 20 to 30 minutes before you want to wind down for bed, as it does cause great sleepiness. Um, that'll actually lead us into the next stack, which is longevity and epigenetic signaling. And the first one in that stack is, well, I'll just tell you, the ones we're going to discuss there are epitalon and thymulin, MOTS-C, GHKCU, and we'll throw NAD plus in there as well, as it's often stacked with those. Epitalon in particular is a pineal gland related peptide, and it is to be taken in the evening time. It does cause great sleepiness and does work again with the pulsatility at night. Works with the natural circadian rhythm, cellular aging pathways, immune modulation, and mitochondrial health. I made the mistake of taking that at work a couple weeks ago. I hadn't taken it for a few days, and I always take it at night. And I had forgotten that that one was one that really needs to be done at night. And I took it, and I was sitting at my desk about an hour later, and I was just literally falling asleep at my desk. And I was just like, I need a nap. I need to crawl under my desk right now and just take a nap. So that one is definitely to be taken in the evening time. Wouldn't suggest it during the day unless you want a nap. Thymulin also is another thymalic peptide to be taken in the evening for sleep and recovery. It's often stacked with epitalon as well. There was actually a researcher who discovered most of the peptides and did most of the early research in the peptide space, a Russian scientist. And Brooke says, I had not heard that about epitalon. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely to be taken in the evening. Makes you super, super sleepy. So this researcher, Covinson, who is kind of known as the father of peptides, actually, and peptide science, he was combining thymulin and epitalon, and he was actually curing people of blindness with this. Apparently, I read a study a couple weeks ago. Actually, the lead scientist at our lab that manufactures all of our peptides and does all the R&D on our stacks, he studies Covinson in great detail, and he sent me this study. I'll actually, maybe next week I'll post that study. I'll see if I can get that and post it in the group next week so people can check that out. So the next one in the longevity and epigenetic signaling stack is MOTS-C. And MOTS-C is to be taken in the morning when you wake up fasted. It definitely works better when you're fasted. So have that actually, we'll talk about MOTS-C in quite a few of the different stacks. So what MOTS-C really does is it adjusts cellular and mitochondrial responsiveness. We discussed this one kind of in a lot of detail last week. So what MOTS-C is really doing is it's going into the cell and it's creating mitophagy, which is getting rid of all the old senesced mitochondria that are no longer functioning up to par. And it's demanding that an army of new mitochondria be built in its place. So it's often stacked with in the longevity space, but it's also stacked with, which we'll get into later. It's also stacked heavily with the GLPs, in particular with retatrutide. And the next one in the longevity stack is GHKCU. So this can be taken pretty much at any time of the day. But one thing that needs to be known about GHKCU, and we did discuss this a little bit last week, and we'll go into this in great detail when we talk about the glow stack and the clo stack this week. Um, the GHKCU is a metal binding peptide. It's not necessarily signaling, it's metal binding, and it works differently in a lot broader, longer scale than most of the other peptides that it is stacked with. So, a good rule of thumb with GHKCU copper peptide is to make sure that you stack it with anything else that you're using it with in your day by 30 minutes apart from any other peptides. You'll get the best out of it. And it's not necessarily, last week I mentioned that it had to do a lot with polarity and pH, as it does, but it's more about not competing in the signaling pathways, and it's about leaving time for pulsatility with the different peptides. So again, it's not so much about the fact that it may be using the same signaling pathway as other ones, because copper doesn't compete necessarily directly on signaling pathways with any of the other peptides, even BPC and TB. It doesn't actually compete directly on the signaling pathways, but all of those pathways do cross at nodes. And what it does do is it creates signal, not necessarily signal interference, but signal noise. So we touched on this last week when we were just touching on the idea of stacking peptides and leaving time in between each peptide to be used. And you can think about it, the best analogy I use is if you have a really great song playing on a speaker over here and somebody else is in the other room listening to another speaker turned up loud, and somebody opens the door, all of a sudden now you're getting two signals, not necessarily competing on the same speaker or the same pathway, but just signaling in the body at the same time. So some of them are copacetic to be signaling at the same time, like the Solanc and Samax that we just discussed in the cognitive and neuroplasticity stacks. But GHKCU really causes some signaling noise with other peptides. So it should, as a general rule of thumb, always try to use your GHKCU at least 30 minutes apart from all of your other peptides as the best idea. Now, NAD plus, we'll discuss this. This sort of fits into the longevity and epigenetic signaling as well. NAD plus is not actually a peptide. It's sort of peptide adjacent. NAD plus is it's a gene expression basically that slows, and we produce less of it in our cells as we age. So it has huge anti-aging effects. It's wildly popular these days in capsule form, in injectable form, in nasal sprays, and a lot of people like to get vitamin drips or NAD drips. If you've ever had one, they're not super fun. If they turn up the drip a little bit too high, it often feels like you get a lot of anxiety, and it almost feels like somebody's standing on your chest, and it feels like very impeding. So oftentimes those drips take a long time. And what I found in the research, and what I've even noticed by getting those quite a few times myself, is that you get a huge benefit from it over maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 days after. And then it sort of disappears. So the effects don't last super long. And what I've been researching a lot is the fact that when you flood yourself with 1,000 milligrams or 500 milligrams of NAD plus all at once, you feel really good for a few days, and then it fades really fast. Whereas if you split that dose up over days, you get a better, again, you get a better ongoing pulsatility with it. So I would suggest not doing NAD plus in the 1,000 milligram drip, because that'll usually cost you 500 to $1,000 depending on where you're getting it done. And you can buy vials of NAD or NAD plus nasal sprays that are highly effective to be used daily. And that's one that can be used literally daily. You can use it every single day. You don't need to do a 5 days on, 2 days off. Like many of the daily peptides, when we talk about daily use peptides, most of those are to be cycled 5 and 2 because it is a good idea to not wear out your receptor sites and not have signal flattening. And we'll talk about that specifically as we get into a couple of these. Like, for instance, MOTS-C, it can be used every day pretty well and tolerated every day in like a smaller amount. But I've been studying recently a lot about how doing it 3 days a week and having bigger pulses with it actually allows for your body to deal with it in a better manner, and you don't get a signal flattening over time. And the signal flattening actually is something really to be discussed with a couple of the other peptides as we get in deeper with this as well. So commonly grouped peptides in the longevity epigenetic signaling space are epitalon, thymulin, and those two are often taken together. MOTS-C, GHKCU, and then the NAD plus is sort of an adjunct to that one. NAD plus is sort of an adjunct to all of them, really. And NAD plus is adding cellular energy. It is adding oxygenation and cellular energy to the cells. That's why it's really great stacked with the MOTS-C, because it kind of gives the MOTS-C a little bit of extra firepower and oomph to build that bigger army of mitochondria. Another one in the space that I didn't write this down, but another one is SS31. This is not in the stack that I put forward here, but it's not really to be used at the same time as MOTS-C. It's more of like a one or the other at a time. And generally speaking, the MOTS-C is preferred to be stacked first, or to be cycled first, I should say, in a stack. And you would do the MOTS-C for between 4 and 8 weeks. If you were doing the 3 days a week MOTS-C with a higher dose, you would probably cycle that for more like 4 weeks. If you were doing the smaller dose daily, 5 days on, 2 days off, you might take that out to like 6 or 8 weeks. And then as soon as you're done with that, you would cycle to SS31. We did touch on this a little bit last week. But what that does is the MOTS-C is building, right? So the MOTS-C is building that new army of mitochondria, producing all that fresh ATP and giving you a lot more cellular energy and just energy in the body. You can think of ATP as the currency that literally your body runs on. It's the money that your body runs on. And the mitochondria you can think of as the banks that are producing and printing that money, the Federal Reserve, so to speak. So what the MOTS-C does is in creating that new army of mitochondria and producing all that fresh ATP, there is some sort of small negative effects that happen, which is, and we discussed this a little bit last week, is that ROS, or reactive oxygen species, that can kind of build up in the cells. And some bits of extra like adjunct trash proteins that can build up in the cells as well. And what cycling the SS31 after a cycle of MOTS-C does is goes in, repairs that electron transport chain, and really tunes up the cell wall membrane and allows for that fatty acid oxidation and getting that reactive oxygen species out of the cells and out of and getting sort of taking out the trash, so to speak, I like to call it. So the MOTS-C, amazing cellular energy, anti-aging, turns on the AMPK pathways, and really allows for a fresh army of mitochondria to be giving you much more energy and currency to run on in the body. But then the secondary effects of that are a little bit of a buildup of reactive oxygen species, sorry. And what that can do is it can actually act like cellular rust on the inside of the cells over time. So if you're just constantly pushing MOTS-C, 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 MOTS-C What you're going to do is you're going to actually flatten that signal a little bit over time, which is why we cycle it. And then also cycling that SS31 right behind it helps clean out and take out the trash that was created from cycling the MOTS-C. So the NAD plus also gives a little bit more tune up to that electron transport chain as well. So it's great to be taking along adjunct with the MOTS-C and the SS31 bow. So again, NAD plus is something that you almost can't take too much of it. It's something that you don't ever need to cycle. You could literally take NAD plus in any form every day for the rest of your life, and it's only going to do your body good things. Again, unless you take 1,000 milligrams in a drip and they turn it up too fast, and then it makes you not feel good while it's happening. But you feel great after it. So the reason that these ones are grouped together in that longevity and epigenetic signaling stack is, first of all, gene expression and mitochondrial signaling, and pineal and immune metabolic regulation. So that's where the epitalon and thymulin comes in there. And those are all often discussed together in in cyclic research models, meaning those are all cycled. So the MOTS-C, the epitalon, and the thymulin are all cycled peptides. Those are not ones that you would be taking daily for the rest of your life. You would definitely cycle those for between 4 and 8 week cycles. And you would be taking 2-week to 4-week breaks on those. Brooke had a question here. NAD plus nasal spray, since it's likely to work quickly and then dissipate quickly, is it reasonable to think it's ideal to be used in the AM? Is it stimulating at all? Yes, great question. I find it very stimulating. I've been taking the nasal spray. The NAD plus, similar to the GHKCU injections, kind of bother me a little bit. I get a little bit irritated at the injection site. Most peptides don't bother me, but those two, especially the GHKCU, it bothers about 75% of people. The NAD plus bothers me as injections a little bit as well, and I've started doing some of the injections again. But I prefer it as a nasal spray, and it is highly energizing to me. Some people don't find it as energizing, but I would say probably 50% of people find it quite highly energizing. So definitely to be used in the AM. I don't ever really use myself NAD plus past, I would say, 1 or 2 p.m. as I kind of feel like I'll have too much energy into the evening when I want to kind of tune down. Lauren asked 2 to 4 week breaks between MOTS-C and SS31. Actually, 2 to 4 weeks is fine, but I actually only suggest 1 to 2 weeks in between those two. So it's a good thing. They do work on slightly different pathways. They are both mitochondrial derived peptides, but they work in different ways. How I explained the SS31 isn't so much about building mitochondria as it is uh, as it is geared more towards the electron transport chain and kind of cleaning up the cell and like repairing the cell wall membrane.
We
So
also have a question that came in about GHKCU. What causes the burning sensation at the injection site? I'm feeling a bit of a sting for at least 24 hours. Actually, really hurts.
yeah, so that happens to a lot of people, and you probably noticed as well sometimes if you're taking it in like if you've reconstituted it at a high dilution rate, meaning you've put, let's say, 8 or 10 milliliters into your vial to make it hopefully not sting as much. What I've found is you got to take more of it to get your actual dose. And what ends up happening is it kind of just sits there at the injection site in a ball. Like you can feel like a little raised ball there. And I've had that go for days. Like I've taken the hypervolt to it. I've taken, some arnica gel or arnica lotion, tried to rub it around there, trying to just get things to loosen up in that area. What I've found with the GHKCU is actually reconstituting it harder, meaning less bacteriostatic water in that one so that you can take a much smaller dose. So I make it up really strong. One thing that we found, and I don't know where I found this, I think it was actually on a YouTube video, and one gentleman suggested to, um, so it says I'm doing 2 mils of backwater in the 50 milligram GHKCU. Yeah, that's what I do too. I like to do it at 2 mils rather than like 8 or 10 mils, which I was doing for a while. And I
Mhm.
didn't find it to be less burning and less irritating. It was once or twice, but after that, I noticed that when you put that much liquid in one place there, it tends to just kind of hang out for a while. The GHK, it just kind of hangs around. It doesn't dissipate as easily as most of the other peptides. So what we've found is reconstituting it with less, like 2 mils of backwater, and then only taking like 20 units. So you're still getting a good like 3 or 4 milligram dose of the GHK, but you are not putting so much into your body in one place that it's going to just sit there for a long time and be like a ball. And the other great thing that we found, and I found this on a YouTube video and we tried it and we've had great success with it, my wife and I both, is instead of going in at like let's say a 45 or straight in like you would with your pins with most peptides, if you just barely poke it in and then you turn it and put it just under the dermis layer, just subcutaneous, so just under the cutaneous layer there, and not put it deep into the fatty layer, it tends to dissipate quicker and it tends to hurt less. I don't know why. I don't have any science backed intelligent answer for why that is, but it does definitely seem to be a thing. And we've been kind of counseling people to do it that way with a lot of success. Now, that being said, there's still days that I'll do a GHK injection and I'll do it that way and it'll be just barely sub Q under the skin and it'll still just bother me for some reason, but
Mhm.
definitely less than when you put it into the fatty layer. Brooke
And great.
says, seeing a lot of info stressing the supplementation of folate with MOTS-C. Part of how it works eats up folate. As we get depleted of folate, we can have negative effects, less motivated, tired, etc. Yes, actually, and that's that's a great thing to bring up. Definitely, it does. Um, when we take certain things, certain supplements, certain neural supplements will burn up like all of your choline, right? Like if you take aniracetam, it's an awesome nootropic supplement, but it burns up all of your um, choline in the body. So you want to take like a super bioavailable version of choline with it. So the same because otherwise you'll get headaches if all your choline is burned up in the body. Same thing goes with the folate and the MOTS-C. That definitely depletes the folate. And what can happen is you can become anemic over time. If you're cycling MOTS-C a lot, SS31 is the same. SS31 also depletes folate. I don't think quite as hard as the MOTS-C does, but it does. And over time, you can become anemic from folate. It's not just a vitamin B12, but also folate is one of those things. So I actually found that out the hard way when I found out that I had the MHTFR um, genetic mutation, which means I don't methylate folate or B12. So I had become anemic at one point about 2 years ago, and I needed to start taking methylated forms of those. Didn't take long to tune back up with that, but that's a great question, Brooke. So yeah, definitely make sure that you are supplementing with folate if you are cycling the MOTS-C. Now, one other thing I want to touch on with the MOTS-C is we talked about in the longevity and epigenetic signaling stack that the NAD plus is a really great adjunct and a bolt-on to the MOTS-C as well. I believe we touched on this last week as well. Methylene
We
blue
did.
is another great thing to throw in a stack with the MOTS-C. The methylene blue also really tunes up the electron transport chain. And while you're actually using the MOTS-c, it can actually help get some of that reactive oxygen species out of the cell through that electron transport chain and the cation exchange that happens there. Um, let's see. Brooke says, I bet that's because it has less histamine release since not into the fatty layer. Yeah, probably most likely. Yeah, so that's one thing that we have to discuss when we're talking about stacking peptides. So when you're taking multiple peptides, especially if you're taking them in sort of, let's say, the same session. Like, let's say you're taking a bunch of morning peptides and a bunch of afternoon peptides and a bunch of peptides in the evening to stack because that's when that particular group needs to be taken to work with your natural growth hormone pulse, or it's energizing, so you take it in the morning, or it needs to be taken fasted, so you're taking it generally speaking in the morning. Um, Histamine reactions are basically what happens a lot when you start having too many signals going on in the body at once. And that's not caused really realistically, that's not caused by having too many on the same signaling pathways at once, but it's just having too many signals going on in the body at once causes the histamine reaction, which in turn can make you itchy for a little bit. It's almost the same as like when you take too much vitamin B3 or niacin and you
Mm,
get like a flush, right? Like you'll get red and you'll feel kind of
nice and
itchy
flush.
for 15 or 20 minutes. It's usually not, life-threatening or going to make you sick or anything, but it can be quite uncomfortable for a short amount of time, 15 to 30 minutes. I've done it before where I get a little overzealous with how many peptides I'm going to shoot in a 5 or 10 minute window, and I'll be fine taking, let's say, three of them or like two or three of them in a 5 or 10 minute window. But I'll stack a fourth one with it, and all of a sudden, every single one of the injection sites lights up, gets red, maybe turns into like a little hive, like a raised hive. It gets itchy and really just bothered for, between 10 and let's say 30 minutes. And sometimes it can make you feel a bit woozy, a little like heady, and you need to kind of like just sit down and chill for a few minutes. So, another reason why I don't suggest pinning yourself with too many peptides all at once. Now, I haven't noticed that as much with the nasal sprays as I have the injectables. Like, there's a couple of nasal sprays where I'll do three or four of them in a 10-minute window, and I don't seem to kind of get such the histamine reaction that I do if I'm pinning four peptides at once. Again, I don't recommend pinning four peptides at once. I recommend 20 to 30 minute cycling windows and or not cycling, signaling windows, and letting these things each have their own signal at one time, and letting each one kind of really do its job. When you get too many signals going on, even if they're not crossing pathways, what's actually happening is the body's having a hard time reading all of those at once, and you're not going to get the most out of all of the peptides in your stack. So, all right, let's move on to the healing and recovery signaling stack. Uh, Healing and recovery and tissue signaling stack. So this is probably the biggest stack that's out there currently. And this deals with the BPC 157, the TB 500, the KPV, and the GHKCU, which create your Wolverine with the BPC 157, TB 500. Then you add the KPV or the GHKCU to that, and that now becomes the glow stack. And then you add the KPV to it, and it becomes the Clo stack. So first off, I want to say, I touched on this last week, and I think it's a really big deal that people understand that it's about sequencing, not necessarily interference. The GHKCU initiates gene expression programs where BPC 157 and TB 500 generate more upstream regulatory and structural signaling. Those are shorter signals. The GHKCU seems to be a longer and broader thing happening in the body. And the copper is a redox active metal. So spacing GHKCU from the other two or the other three, it doesn't seem to be as much of a problem in my research with the KPV as it does with the BPC and the TB. But getting the GHKCU copper metal binding peptide away from the other ones by 30 minutes avoids a few things. So it avoids transient oxidative signaling overlap, which is that thing that I keep mentioning about having too many signals going on at once, and the oxidative stress that can happen in the body due to that. It reduces the signaling noise when multiple pathways are activated simultaneously. So you're going to have much less chance of the histamine reactions that we were just talking about. And you're going to have improved interpretability in those experimental models in the body. So bottom line is GHKCU copper is a metal binding redox active peptide. The BPC-TB are signaling non-metal peptides, and putting them together, especially in the same vial or in the same nasal spray, or even sucking them up from different vials into the same syringe to pin those at once so you don't have to shoot yourself 3 or 4 times and with separate things, causes huge chemical instability, signaling distortion, and reduces the peptide integrity. And this is proven time and time again. And I keep this past week, I saw a bunch of influencers on talking about how, oh, people are on about how you need to separate these things and you don't. The science shows this and that and the other. Well, I don't know what science they're talking about, because the science definitely shows signal distortion and reduced peptide integrity just inside the same vial or the same syringe, as mentioned before. Like, the integrity of those peptides chains is going to break down because of the pH and the polarity that they each carry or don't carry. So I definitely do not suggest ever putting the glow stack or the clo stack into the same vial or the same nasal spray for that matter. I definitely would avoid that. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there selling it as the next greatest thing. And these things, those 4 things are absolutely amazing together in the body to create so many different things. I mean, we could go through a giant list of things here. The BPC, if you can actually get more out of your BPC and your TB by not combining them. So the science shows that they are fine to be combined together, but the BPC, well, let's look at a high level comparison of these 4 really quickly. So the primary research role of each one of these is the BPC 157 acts on vascular and cytoprotective regulation. It's through the endothelial layers, and it's systemic. The TB 500, it works on actin dynamics and angiogenesis, so that's working on structural tissue remodeling. The KPV works on cytokine and immune modulation, so anti-inflammatory signaling or inflammatory signaling in the anti category, we'll say. And the GHKCU is really about gene expression and ECM signaling. So it's transcriptional and epigenetic. So you could really think about those 4 things across the board as not really necessarily competing, but giving them all their own time allows for, if the copper is set apart from the other ones, it allows the copper to have a better matrix to work on like a more healed matrix to work on because the other signals have already happened, if that makes any sense. So because of its broad transcriptional footprint, timing and context matter more with the more narrow acting peptides. So the key reason for taking the GHKCU 30 minutes apart is signal clarity, not pathway competition. Again, it's not really about competing for receptors or receptor pathways. It's about the clarity overall. And overall not having too many signals going on in the body at one time and avoiding signal crowding at that transcriptional level. So GHKCU initiates gene expression programs. The BPC TB generate upstream regulatory and structural signals. So early signaling peptides, they set the environment, so to speak, so that GHKCU can act on a more stabilized cellular context. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
It's a lot of big words, right? Does anybody have any questions about those? I think we've kind of talked those to death. We talked a lot about those last week, but I think those are the most heavily used peptides in the market currently. And I just wanted to really touch on those so people understand how to get the best out of them. Really talking about timing, the BPC 157 and the TB 500 do work well together in a stack, but there's a lot of thought about the TB 500 being dosed in larger quantities 3 times a week, as opposed to smaller quantities every day, like the BPC 157. And there's a lot of validity to that. I mean, they have been shown to work really well together, day over day over day, but um, morning or evening daily dosing with the TB500, BPC, morning or evening daily. Some people complain that those two are somewhat energizing to them. I don't find that at all. Somebody is asking, I'm excited to try BPC and TB separated. Yeah, Christine, I'm actually thinking about starting to do those separated as well. I've always done them together. I've never done them
Wow.
separated, but I'm gonna set up a protocol for myself in the next couple weeks to start doing those separated. And I think I'm gonna try the model of 3 times a week higher dose of the TB500. And one of the reasons for that is the way TB500 signals. Um, it's really working on an angiogenic modulation, whereas the BPC 157 is working on endothelial signaling, right? So they are working in different pathways.
Yes.
The TB 500 is working on cytoskeletal and inflammatory modulation and rebuilding, while the endothelial signaling and anti-inflammatory is coming from the BPC 157. So, um,
Did you get the question from Brooke
what are
about
the
the?
recommended dosages for TB 500 3 times per week? It's actually doubling the dose. So the daily dose is 500, like 300 to 500 micrograms. So would be like a half a milligram, um, 500 micrograms. Somebody else is asking. So the recommended dosage for TB 500 3 times a week would be double that. So you would be taking a milligram 3 times a week. Yeah.
Now we did have a question from Brooke about GHKCU and in a nasal spray combined with KPV.
Yeah. So the KPV is working a little bit differently. So the KPV is actually working a lot on immune modulation and inflammatory signaling via cytokines.
Mhm.
So it's working on a totally different thing than the GHKCU and the BPC 157 and the TB 500. So they all work. You could almost think of those four peptides as different layers of the same, like you could think about them in a layered view. They're different layers of the same thing, right? They're
Mhm.
all working towards basically anti-inflammatory signaling and rebuilding, right? But they're all working in a different direction on a different signaling pathway. And KPV seems to be the one that works the best in combination with GHKCU and doesn't seem to have the same type of breakdown in structure of the actual amino chains in the
Mhm.
peptides with the copper as the other two do. Yeah.
So
So
really separating those out away from your copper is ideal.
yeah, you can. I mean, if you're injecting, I definitely would leave 30 minutes between the copper and anything else. If you're doing the nasal spray, the GHKCU and KPV can be done together in one in the nasal spray. That seems to not have any negative side effects or down regulation of signaling. But you want to keep that GHKCU away from the BPC and the TB.
Okay.
You do. The pure science shows that. Let's see,
So the
Christine.
glow stack is something that isn't really.
The glow stack was cooked up by marketing people
Mhm.
and people who just want to make peptides and sell them to people without actually understanding the science behind or really taking the time to understand the science behind why we're actually stacking those four things together. So when you actually really dig into how each one is signaling, what it's working on, which layers it's working on, you find that the GHKCU is best kept aside from those other ones, especially when you're talking about pinning it or using it as an injection.
And we're really looking at about a half hour break.
20 to 30 minutes. Again, most of these have a pretty short signaling half-life in the body.
Mhm.
Um, Most of them are below 22 minutes. Some of them are just mere minutes, like 2 to 3 minutes. Some of them are very, very quick. The copper tends to be a little bit longer because it's working on gene expression and
Mhm.
it's transcriptional. So it tends to have a little bit longer life in the body, but the initial signaling of that happens very quickly within 20 to 30 minutes. So we say 30 minutes is very safe to not get any other reaction or any signaling noise happening with the GHK.
Wanted
So one of the things that's great about the GHK is it actually chelates copper ions. So it's delivering copper into the cells in a regulated form, which is difficult to do if you're taking like copper like in a vitamin form.
Mhm.
Even if it is chelated, what happens when you're using the GHK-Cu copper on its own? It's actually delivering the copper into the cells in a very regulated manner, in a very homologous. Um, what is homologous? Yeah, like so the ions. It breaks it down so that the ions can cross the barrier because they're very, very small and they're like all the same size. So you're not going to get like sometimes with chelated copper in a vitamin, um, it breaks down not all in the same size and you get some sort of like, uh, how do I put this? Like too many people trying to go through a doorway at once or
The
multiple
bottleneck.
people trying to go through multiple doorways at once and kind of getting jammed up on some of them because some of them are like the molecules are too large.
So it's creating a bottleneck so everything can't flow through there properly.
Correct. So that's one great thing about the GHKCU copper is that it chelates the copper ions in a manner that is related to extracellular matrix organization and metalloproteinase, that's a hard word to say, metalloproteinase activity and cellular differentiation pathways. So um, that's very different than the KPV, which again works on cytokine signaling, very different from the BPC, which works on regulatory, anti-inflammatory, and endothelial signaling. and the TB500, which is primarily working on cytoskeletal remodeling, right? So again, we talked about last week the analogy of the BPC 157 regulating the inflammatory response and going in and cleaning out the inflammation, so to speak. And it's sort of like if a room or a building has been on fire, the BPC 157 is coming in, and that's the fire crew. It's coming in, hosing everything down, cleaning everything out with the pickaxes, and getting the space ready to rebuild. And the TB500 is that remodeling or rebuilding. It's the architects and engineers that come in and redesign and rebuild the space.
Got it all set.
Um,
Now we did get a question that came in on the on the Q&A, and basically was talking about a company that already sells the peptides already reconstituted for you. Can you touch on this? I
so
hope it
I don't
works.
I don't recommend
Yeah.
buying peptides already pre-reconstituted. Here's why. When peptides are reconstituted, when they hit that backwater or that bacteriostatic water, or they hit sterile water for injection for that matter, once those are wet, so to speak, they have a life of about 6 to 8 weeks maximum before those chains start to break down, before they start to oxidize, and before that peptide starts to really just become no good. So most peptides are really generally very solid for 4 to 6 weeks. Some are solid for up to 8 weeks, and depending on how you keep them, what temperature you keep them at in your fridge. That's another thing we'll touch on about dosing and reconstitution really quickly. A lot of peptides, when they're put into the bacteriostatic water and then they're put into the fridge, the backwater contains a little bit of benzyl alcohol in it, right? And that benzyl alcohol is changing the pH of the environment that peptide is now in. So again, that's the thing that can cause like oxidation over time. It's there for a reason. In the bacteriostatic water, it's there for a reason, for preservation, to preserve the peptide and the solution for a certain amount of time without bacteria and other things getting in there. But what can happen is, especially with a product like, let's say, tesamorelin. So tesamorelin as a peptide was originally developed to be a single use, one-time use only peptide, to be used with, not with bacteriostatic water, but to be used with sterile water for injection. There's actually a product on the market currently called Egrifta. And if you take a look at what Egrifta actually is just tesamorelin. And they call it Egrifta WR. I think it's like weekly reconstitution or something like that. And they sell it in very small amounts so that you only reconstitute a week at a time. And they say do not refrigerate. So you reconstitute it with only sterile water for injection, no bacteriostatic water, because again, the backwater, the benzyl alcohol in that is going to change the pH of that particular peptide. It's going to precipitate, which basically means falling out of solution, and it's going to start to thicken, especially if the pH change with the benzyl alcohol in the backwater is paired with a temperature that's just even remotely too cold for it. It can just turn into a gelatin. So we have a lot of people that'll, they crank their fridges down to 36 degrees and keep their fridges really cold. And most peptides like to be stored at between 38 and 43 degrees. That's the ideal temperature to store peptides at. So we suggest storing your peptides in the door of your fridge, not up in the back side of your fridge where the cooling mechanism is closer, and it generally tends to be colder in the back side of the fridge. And lately, we've been doing all of the tesamorelin with sterile water for injection. And we've even been telling people, hey, don't even put this in the fridge. Keep it somewhere that's not going to get hot. so that you're not going to, get bacterial growth and stuff in it more easily because you're not using the backwater. But this should be good for 2 weeks in sterile water for injection because they're all sealed. As long as you're wiping everything with alcohol swabs on the top of your peptides every time you're getting them out for use before you're putting any pins in anywhere, and maybe transferring some bacteria that may be on the top into the vial. They're sealed very well. I mean, these things are vacuum sealed in the lyophilization process. And realistically speaking, even using sterile water for injection, most peptides are going to be fine preserved, even at room temperature, for up to a week for sure, if not 2 weeks. So the tesamorelin, we're even saying to people, reconstitute this in a manner that you're using it up within 2 weeks and leave it out of your fridge. You don't even need to put it in your fridge. Just leave it room temperature or somewhere slightly cool, like in a cupboard where, it's not going to be hitting any natural light because the natural light and sunlight definitely does break down peptides. Brooke says, my question was more about stability together, about the BPC and TB separate. Stability together I think what you mean, Brooke, is about stability, meaning like stability in signaling at the same time. Oh, she was talking about the KPV and copper. Okay.
Mhm.
See that, yeah. So the KPV and copper seem to be pretty stable together, particularly in the nasal sprays. And this pertains to the nasal sprays that I work with, and you work with, Brooke, that contain the Protixa ion technology. So that Protixa ion technology, there's a paper coming very soon from the animal studies that were just recently completed. And those nasal sprays across the board, they tested, I think, 15 or 20 different peptides in those sprays, as well as NAD plus, and a bunch of other non-peptide things. They found that in the heat studies and in the shelf life studies, that the studies went for 4 months. And at the end of 4 months, they were testing all along. And at the end of 4 months, they tested for viability. They tested for potency of the final, chains of peptides that were still present, the full connected chains, and they found literally 0% degradation across the board. I'm really looking forward to the study being compiled in the next week or so, and there's going to be real world data on the efficacy of those peptide sprays. So, in regards to your question, the KPV and the copper being okay together in the nasal spray, yes, absolutely. I think in the nasal spray, it's because of the Protixa ion and the nanolipid technology that's actually infused with that as well. It's actually doing something to protect the molecules so that the pH of one is not breaking down the chains of the other, so to speak. Now, would I put those in a vial together? No, absolutely not. I don't think I would put those in a vial together or reconstitute them together in a syringe. But in the nasal spray, the studies so far have showed full viability and zero breakdown of those chains over 4 month period at room temperature, which is quite astounding, actually.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we were excited to hear that, because that's all technology that our lab that we work with in the peptide space has developed over the last 3 years. And actually, we've had some recent meetings with some government and military contractors in the medical space, and they're actually super interested in that Protixa ion technology as drug delivery system for
Something else.
between 10 and 20 other medications that are outside of the peptide realm. Because that ionic technology is actually working lipophilic and hydrophilic. So it's working across the board on all kinds of compounds.
That's impressive.
Brooke says, do we worry about shaking the nasal sprays before using them? How do we feel about folks using reconstitution water online versus backwater, since that is RX? Some people can't get backwater. Yeah, so I've been going over this a lot just because of the tesamorelin issue that's been kind of happening industry wide. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there right now about how to reconstitute your tesamorelin to get it to not gel up in your fridge. And, you know, the discussions I've been having with our lab lead, he's been studying peptides for 15, 20 years. He's been super involved in the space for a long time. And he actually said to me last week that the peptide chains are far more hardy than people think they are. Um, Now, once reconstituted, you definitely don't want to shake them in a crazy manner violently. You always want to swirl your peptides to get them to reconstitute in the solution. You don't want to shake them violently because they can be kind of touchy right when they get reconstituted. But what we're finding across the board with all of the peptides in this Protixa ion technology system, and not to make this discussion all about that, but because this is not a sales call. I'm not trying to sell you guys anything. I'm just trying to give good information about peptides here. But in particular, what they found is I had this discussion with our lab lead about this, and because I was asking him how they put the peptides into the solution. Is it agitated? How does it happen? He said it gets very agitated in that solution. And he said they don't find any breakdown of it when they're doing it with this ionic solution that they've created, that they've developed. It's not in the same way. It's not really getting shaken violently. It gets stirred and agitated, but quite rigorously and quite fast. So things are spinning and spooling,
Mhm.
while the ionic technology is getting infused into it. Um, I think I'm on a tangent. I don't think I answered Brooke's question fully.
It was about the
Do we
bed.
worry about shaking the nasal sprays before using them? Yes. You want to you don't need to go crazy. Just a little shake just to make sure that,
Okay.
nothing is fallen out of solution, or there's not any peptide sitting on the bottom. We generally don't find that even when they're sitting there for a long time, if it's in a clear bottle, they've done these tests in the lab, you don't really ever see a separation necessarily of like a
Mhm.
layer of something that has like gone to the top or floated to the top or the bottom, like you would um, dealing with like a lipophilic versus hydrophilic
Mhm.
solution. We don't really see that at all with the ionic solution. It seems to really, once it's in there,
So it
and
stays homogeneous once it's mixed. It
yes,
it
exactly.
stays
It does stay
captured in the
homogeneous
solution.
once put in there. So you don't need to worry a whole lot about shaking the spray, but we do say, give it a little shake, just for good measure.
Would
It's
you recommend more of like a swirling kind of method? Because I think I might shake mine a little bit more violently than I should.
I mean, I wouldn't shake them violently. We do know that violent shaking definitely does harm the peptide chains when you're speaking of reconstitution with backwater or with the sterile water.
Hmm.
Now, again, I'm not sure exactly how or why, but that ionic solution combined with the nanolipid emulsification that they're using is doing something to protect those molecules, because you definitely, most certainly, cannot reconstitute a lyophilized peptide in a vial and sit it out on the counter for 4 months and expect it to be viable in any way, shape, or form. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's just
that out of the fridge, that
uh,
thing's going to be toast for sure, absolutely within 4 to 6 weeks. Probably sooner, kept at room temp. Yeah,
well, and that's what I've always with those nasals. That's really literally a game changer when you talk about peptides.
absolutely, absolutely. And again, not to make this a sales call about our Protex ion technology, but hey,
We weren't going there. We
tout
were
it if you
pulled
got
there.
it, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I found it to be. I'm not a big needle guy.
A lot of people aren't big needle guys
Yeah,
or big
and
needle girls for that matter.
needle girls, guys. I'm not needle people. So the ability to administer the peptides nasally has made them more accessible for me. Uh,
Yeah. I mean,
so
I've become over the years not so averse to the needles, but I also over the years have developed like very large stacks and I take a lot of peptides most days.
Yeah.
So for me, rather than pinning myself, 7 or 8 times a day, it's really nice to be able to take some of them as a nasal spray. I take the NAD as a nasal spray. I take the GHK as a nasal spray. I switch back and forth between the BPC TB being a nasal and being an injectable. Um, the Mott C I always do as an injectable. I haven't actually tried the Mott C spray myself yet. Probably going to try that soon. I have
Hmm.
not tried the GLPs as a spray. We have a lot of people using the retatrutide, and
Just say the
that's
triple
the
agonist.
triple agonist. Yeah, I shouldn't say retatrutide, just say triple agonist. Don't want to get sued. Um, we have a lot of people using that and finding huge success with the nasal spray of that. And I think I'm going to be, I take the triple agonist myself, and both my wife and I do, and we see great results with it. I'm going to actually switch as soon as the vial that I'm on right now is done this week. I'm going to actually switch over to the nasal sprays. Now, speaking of signaling, with the nasal sprays and the GLPs, they work a little bit differently. Like we discussed earlier in this conversation about the signaling half-life of most peptides being very short,
Yeah.
minutes to a couple of hours maximum almost. And many of them sit in the couple of minutes to 20, 2 to 20 minute range. Um, the GLPs sit at like 6 to 7 days
They have a long.
as an injectable. Now, what we found early on with the nasal sprays, we thought you were going to have to, take 10 nasal sprays at once to get your
Oh,
1 or 2 milligram dose of Reta or Sema or whatever GLP you're using with
whatever.
it.
Yeah.
And what we found is because of the bioavailability of that in the epithelial layers in the mucosal membranes in the nasal pathways, is they hit fast and hard, but the signals also die very quickly. So, whereas it's very easy to teach somebody how to use a GLP, and generally speaking, if you've got to start low and slow and titrate up to make
Mhm.
sure that you're having tolerability without major side effects with those, which is what we want. You don't want somebody to take too much of something and have it make them nauseous and feel nauseous for a week because it's got, a 6 to 7 day signaling half-life.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people that start too fast with the GLPs, they just stop. Like they do it once and they're like, oh, it made me sick and I never took it again. Well, they didn't do a titration schedule and build up to it and make sure that they were having tolerability in the body with it without side effects before going too big with it. So go big or go home is definitely not a phrase that I like to use with peptides.
Mhm.
Um, when I'm working with people in stacks, generally speaking, if somebody is looking at using 7 or 8 different peptides for different things and stacking those throughout the day, if they haven't been using peptides before, I definitely don't put them on 7 things all at once. Like
Great.
they might make an order and get 5 or 6 or 7 things, but we always titrate them up. We start with 1 or 2 and we see how those are working for, 3 days to a week before we introduce another peptide. Because if you're going to get a reaction or you're going to have something happening, we want to have a little bit of time with these things to see what each
Mhm.
one is actually doing. So stacking, amazing. Copacetic things with each other, amazing. But also understanding at a very micro level what each one of these things is doing for you
Yeah.
is, I think, a key to stacking peptides.
Well, and also that's one of the reasons why we say it's really essential that you work with a practitioner that is well versed in peptides.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Just
and that goes for doctors and clinicians and other people out there, making protocols for people, understanding, having a good understanding of the signaling pathways that you're hitting, any cross signaling or any signaling noise that could be happening because you're using similar pathways, or just understanding the idea of not putting 10 signals in your body all at once Everything everywhere all at once is not a good thing.
Well, no, sometimes less is more, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in peptides,
Yeah,
less is
actually,
more.
and less is more leads us into our next stack that we'll talk about is in the growth hormone axis research stack.
I just wanted to mention that we are at 6:15. So we're 15 past the hour.
Oh
I
wow,
can't believe,
this goes fast, doesn't
I
it?
cannot believe I just looked down at the clock. And I do want to make sure that we are respectful of other people's time.
I
Now,
still
I
got
did
six
have
pages of notes here.
a webinar for next week. But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to break this into part two.
Yeah, I think so. Because
So I'm going to do
I still
stacks
got about
part
six
two.
pages of notes that I didn't get through here.
No,
I still didn't
absolutely.
talk about the sexual health and neuroendocrine interaction stack. We didn't talk about the
Hmm.
growth hormone axis stacks. Um, and there's a lot we didn't touch on.
So
So,
I'm gonna pivot from our original title for next week, and we are going to do, using an airplane reference, part two of this episode, so we can go ahead and finish up because I think stacks are a major, not issue, but they're a major question in the peptide space. And I think we need to spend more time on it. So I think part two makes sense. Um,
yeah.
I will alter that and be sending out a link to everybody that was on this webinar. Um, and so that way everybody gets that and is able to go ahead and log in so we can finish this discussion rather than rushing through this last bit of information and giving clip notes. I'd rather do what we did today where we were able to dive in and get down to the nitty gritty,
Yeah,
which is
we'll
important.
touch on those stacks that we didn't get to this week.
Absolutely.
And bring more questions next week. So, if we finish stacks a little bit early, since there's just, I think, a couple of stacks that we didn't talk about that are kind of in the most popular zone of peptide use right now.
Hmm. Hmm.
So maybe it won't take too long to get through those couple of stacks next week, but we can kind of do a quick overview of what we went through this week, maybe
I
for
think that would
5 to 10 minutes
be great. I think
next
that
week
would
as
be
well.
great. And then that'll give some of our guests an opportunity to kind of percolate and kind of ruminate over those what they learned today, and maybe some more questions will pop up, and we can revisit those after we've gone over all of the stacks that we didn't touch today.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to throw a couple more questions or anything that you guys want to hear about in particular, whether it be um, uh, a macro topic or a micro topic, specifically talking about one peptide or a particular peptide stack that we maybe didn't touch on for you this week, feel free to write something there in the webinar chat or um,
We're in
the
the Q&A.
the
Now,
Q&A.
I did wanted Lauren, or is that Lauren? Yeah, Lauren, we do send out a link for the replays. So please request that link from whoever invited you, and they will be able to go ahead and get that to you.
Yeah. Last week, Tony gave me an MP4, just a audio file for last week. So if anybody wants last week's as well, just text me and I'll just send it you, or
So then that
email,
way you
text
guys
or
can get those.
email.
Text or email. And that's the easiest one. The video, if you run the video, it's our amazing faces, so I understand why you might want it. But if you're just looking for the information, the audio file will be just
Yep.
all right. All righty, everybody. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We will be doing this every Tuesday unless otherwise specified. Um, Sometimes our schedules do get in the way, but we will do this every Tuesday. We look forward to seeing everybody here. And we're looking at ways that we can get the audience also involved, if not just audio, maybe some other ways as well. So,
Some little tiled visuals so we can see
yes,
everybody
yeah,
and
I'm
kind of have
working on
more
it.
of make it feel like we're more in the same room because we designed these Tuesdays as really discussions. It's
Absolutely.
it's Tony and I up here talking a lot, but it's really about like discussing over and over sometimes these things. So, we may touch on things 6 weeks from now that we touched on in the first episode. Different people joining, asking questions, and that's just what
Mhm.
this is supposed to be, is an open forum,
Well,
really.
and then as we talked about in the very first episode, the science is advancing, it's evolving.
Yeah.
And in 6 or 7 months down the road, there may be some new science that we need to discuss and we need to talk about
Yep.
some peptides that are currently being used.
And
To
even
great lengths.
stacking as things go forward. There's new peptides coming available. Stacking and dosing is changing a little bit.
Hmm.
They're finding, different dosages for different types of things.
Hmm.
So again, we touched on it with the Mott C and a couple of the other ones about, you can do it in a smaller dose, like 1 milligram per day, every day, or you can do 3 milligrams 3 times a week, that type of thing. And
Hmm.
those kind of hit different things. And depending on the time that you're going for, if you're looking for acute healing or if this is like ongoing, let's say housekeeping type of thing,
Hmm.
the dosing will be different. And we'll touch on that next week again with the when we touch the growth hormone axis stacks. Um, the dosing on those singularly is very different than it is if you're taking them together in a stack. And and more is not always more. Sometimes you get diminishing returns and actually less out of it if you stack too much of the wrong things together at the same time. So we'll touch again on that next week and dive deep into those next couple of stacks.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Thank you
Thanks,
for joining
guys.
us. We
I
will
hope
see
you
you
guys have as
next
much
week.
fun in this as we do.
Yeah, I'm having a great time and learning as well. Preparing helps us learn even more. So we
Yeah.
appreciate you. Thank you and have a wonderful night. We'll see you on the next one. Bye bye
Peace.
now.